Hi, John.
How are you?
I'm good.
Please introduce yourself.
I'm Eric Gustafson. I'm the founder and director of Enabling Peace in Iraq Center, EPIC. We've been around since 1998, and we're focused on advancing peace and development in Iraq.
A lot of my followers have asked about what are the U.S. objectives in Iraq?
Obviously, if you go through history, things have changed over time, but what's been consistent always has been national security interests. So recently, that would be things like ISIS. It would also be about the economic interests, particularly around oil and energy resources reaching global markets. And then third, I would say post 1979, it's countering Iranian influence.
I think it's important to acknowledge that the actions of our country helped put the current situation in motion. And this is just my personal opinion, I think it's unfair that even though every country in the world pursues its own security, we've done that at the expense of ordinary people in Iraq that have suffered unimaginable things. And in the current situation, Iraqis are taking it upon themselves to change their country in a peaceful way. Isn't that also something that the U.S. says it wants in the world?
What really is most important and can positively impact all of those three areas is human rights and governance. Even within the current administration, you can go to the State Department and you can talk to people who do understand that improvements in governance, human rights, all of that leads to progress on a lot of these other national interests that the U.S. has in Iraq.
If that's the case, why isn't the U.S. doing more to support the peaceful processes that are happening in Iraq now?
I mean, sadly, part of that has to do with the current administration. It has to do with the president. If the White House is not really engaged, then you're not going to see the U.S. government engaged to the extent that it should be.
Well, isn't it true that in the U.S., it's not just the president deciding the policy all by him or herself?
One of the most important chambers, of course, that has some influence on it is Congress. Congress is the one that passes not just the appropriations bills. That's the legislation that funds the U.S. government and funds these agencies and directs resources through those agencies, setting, in a sense, some of the priorities. It's also the authorization bills of Congress that authorize programs and activities that those agencies then carry out. That has a huge impact. Congress still will sometimes push things in one direction or another. You will see congressional hearings, you'll see members of Congress speak out, people like Senator Chris Murphy and others, they'll speak out about what they're seeing is happening on the ground. The president is looking at things like, there's US public opinion, there's the media coverage and the narrative that is put out there about Iraq, think tanks and the experts, the United Nations and other world bodies, and even the Iraqi people themselves and Iraqi leaders will also have some influence.
Well, I know that Iraqis that I talk to feel alone. They feel that nobody's paying attention and nobody cares. Is that true? Is Iraq invisible?
No, it is constantly part of our conversation within this office. When we go to policy forums, discussions hosted by other public policy institutes, think tanks, it will come up. I mean, I don't think there's a single Iraq specialist or analyst here in Washington, D.C. that is not factoring in protests. I just pulled up, before you called, I just pulled up the latest report from the CRS, the Congressional Research Service, and front and center, it's talking about the protests. In February 2020, the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad issued this statement, and this is coming straight from the Secretary of State and from the administration. Current conditions in Iraq and the region require an independent and honest government committed to addressing the needs of the Iraqi people. That's a great statement.
Well, let me ask you a tough question. Every Iraqi listening to that will say, so what?
Yeah.
How does that help me?
Yeah, and that, I think, where it comes down to what resources are being directed to address these issues. And quite frankly, it's been pitiful. I do share the view that the U.S. is hugely responsible for what has happened in Iraq. It was the U.S. who invaded and overthrew the regime. It was the U.S. who expedited a fast transition that put some of the wrong people in power. So many things that the U.S. has done, which has been detrimental to Iraq. And we do have, I think, an enormous responsibility to help undo some of that damage.
I guess it's important for me to share to the folks that are watching this that there's U.S. government that is very much involved in geopolitics and often in a very unfair way. But there's also American people that want to support peaceful processes in Iraq, not necessarily specific people are better than others, but rather there's ways of sorting out these issues and these conflicts that are better than others. People are watching this in the United States. How can they understand what options are available to them to be able to impact U.S. policy in Iraq?
I would say get busy. The relationships that they have with their neighbors, with fellow Americans, is hugely important and can shape the way that those other American citizens who are also voters and might contribute to political campaigns and be involved in other ways, that has a cumulative effect over time. They can speak to their own elected officials. They can contact their members of Congress. And I think it's important to build that relationship. Every congressional office will have a district office. You can schedule a meeting. Please do so. It has an impact. Also, build a relationship with the organizations, the advocacy organizations that are here in Washington, D.C. EPIC, like Mercy Corps, like the Arab American Institute, so many others that are working day in, day out, doing the advocacy work that's really crucial, making sure that your voices are heard. They'll also then make it a lot easier for you to be involved by through action alerts or very easy, like through an email, like being able to send a message to your members of Congress.
If it were me, and it has been me, I'm skeptical that makes a difference at all. I'm one person.
I would say that it can, because it's the squeaky wheel phenomenon. It's so true. You are helping to create a squeaky wheel, and they keep hearing it squeak. And it's not just you. Look to your community and look for others. Maybe there's a veteran who served in Iraq who continues to have that sense of mission. Maybe there's other Iraqi Americans. Maybe there's even faith leaders.
What I realized when I started working in advocacy was they don't know everything about everything. I figured, well, these are really smart people. They're in an important position. They must know more about this than I do. But there's always something that you know from your own experience that can help them understand the situation better. And they need that information. Yeah. They want that information. If they have to decide about an issue and they get 15 phone calls supporting one position and one phone call or no phone calls supporting the other position, that's clear indication to them of what their voters want.
Exactly. And when you do, let us know that you met with your member. Send a quick note about what you discussed. Then we have the opportunity to go to the Washington, D.C. office and drop in and say, hey, we understand, that your constituent met with you. Here's some more materials about some of the recommendations that we're making. Now it's much more powerful. But the worst thing in the world is to walk into, for me doing this kind of advocacy work, is to walk into a congressional office where the office says, we're not hearing from anybody on this issue.
Thank you very much, Eric. I appreciate you taking time to talk and helping us understand more.
Yeah, pleasure. Yeah, thanks, John.
And please stay healthy.
Yes, you too.
All right.
All right. Take care. Yep. Bye.